Where are the low value men? Like, what are all the low value men up to during these trying times? Because the high value men, I know they're around. They won't shut the fuck up. Low value men, I have not heard a word out of. I'm starting to think I'm on their side. I think I want one of those. I want a low value man. They don't make podcasts. I haven't seen one low value man make a podcast. Do they not know how to use microphones? Maybe that's a good thing. That's hot. All right, I've never seen a man use a microphone for good.
Until now, everybody buckle up. It's low value mail time with your host, Danny Polishchuk. What is happening, everybody? Welcome back. Welcome back to an all-new episode of Low Value Mail on this Tuesday, July 18th, 2023, the year of our Lord. This is episode number 70, and if you could tell in the sound of my voice, I am jazzed for this one, because joining us tonight, we have none other than Nick Bryant. If you don't know who Nick Bryant is, well, you're gonna know. You're gonna know. I think this one is right up all of our alleys, if you will. Nick Bryant is a reporter, and he's the author of The Franklin Scandal, the upcoming book, The Truth About Watergate, A Tale of Extraordinary Lies and Liars, and is the director of the nonprofit organization Epstein Justice, which seeks justice on behalf of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators. And he also released Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book, and he's been on the Epstein case since 2012. We're going to talk to him. We're going to bring him on very shortly, but I just have to have a few things to get out of the way, and then we're just going to get to it. There's no need to drag any of this on. So, a few notes. As always, please like and subscribe, do all that stuff, leave a rating, review. It helps. Secondly, I tweeted about this, I posted about this. The after show is no longer, so there's no more after show anymore. In lieu of the after show, we will be doing subscriber-only streams, which are basically the same as the after show. And sometimes they might even happen when the after show normally did, but they just won't always be after the show. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll be afternoons, just so everybody can get a chance to join the after show live, because everybody has different schedules. So, and if you would like access to the after show, and as well as to support this show, Low Value Mail, and everything I do, please sign up at patreon.com/lowvaluemail, or you can become a Twitter subscriber. Basically what I'm going to do, and this is kind of the only thing that I'm going to have going forward, is that at 500 subscribers, I am going to add 30 minutes to the show, 250 subscribers after. So at 500 subscribers, the show is going to be 2.5 hours. At 750 subscribers, the show is going to be 3 hours. At 1,000 subscribers, we're going to hit 3.5 hours. And then at 15 subscribers, the show will take its final form as a 4-hour show with multiple guests. And I'll probably have a producer at that point. So if you want to help out with the show and help it get to a 4-hour show, just please sign up for the Patreon, $5 a month, and I get all these extra guests, all this fun stuff. Hopefully don't get kicked off of YouTube. Who knows what'll happen. But anyways, next week we have Anomaly with us. If you guys know Anomaly, he is going to be a guest next week. And tomorrow night we are back with an all new episode of The Bathhouse, live at 10:30 p.m. on this here channel. So please check us out then, live from the Stand Comedy Club Green Room. All right, without further ado, give me 1 second, please, while I set this all up. Hold on. Let me see. And Nick, let me just unmute him. Let me unmute myself. Let me unmute. Here we go. Nick, can you hear me there?
Yep.
Nick, welcome to Low Value Mail. I appreciate you coming on the show. I'm very excited for this one. I think a lot of people are as well. So I appreciate you taking your time for this. So without further ado, Nick, can you just tell people about yourself for anybody who may not know who you are?
My name is Nick Bryant, and I'm a writer. These days I specialize in dark, unsavory subjects like the government covering up child trafficking. I wrote a book about it called The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal, in which I demonstrated that there was a trafficking network. Uh, the epicenter was Omaha, and they flew kids all around. But there was a house in Washington, D.C. that was wired for audiovisual blackmail. And politicians would get blackmailed with these kids. Now, I started researching that book in 2002. It was before the Epstein case broke at all, and people just kind of wrote me off. And then, let me see, 8 years ago, I published a book called Confessions of a DC Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail. And that is also about a CIA honey trap. It was the gay escort service was run by a gentleman named Henry Vincent. And I've also did a lot of research into Epstein, and I acquired his black book in 2012, and I put it on I tried to pitch it to mainstream magazines, and mainstream magazines really don't want to deal with me.
Yeah. More so now than before?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I was pitching the Franklin Scandal to them, I could see the cognitive dissonance in editors' eyes. They would say to themselves, this is really a horrible story, and I should help Nick Bryant. Or, I think I can just write off Nick Bryant as crazy, and I can have a nice dinner with my family tonight.
Right.
So I ended up publishing Epstein's black book on the internet in 2015, and it's certainly got a lot of play. And I've also written some very comprehensive articles about Jeffrey Epstein.
And, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so none of this stuff, obviously everything that's come to light since you kind of started on the Epstein stuff, none of this has in any way vindicated you in the eyes of the people who were maybe not quite as interested in the past?
Yes, it's interesting. I have people come up to me occasionally and say that aren't in the publishing industry, that say, you were right. But I've had no one in the publishing industry come up to me and say, you were right. And this Epstein saga, it's really the government is obviously covering up for a bunch of child molesters. And as Americans, we cannot allow this to happen. With the Franklin scandal, it was pre-internet, and I had to do a lot of digging, and it was a message that people didn't want to hear. But now with Epstein, it's out there in the open. We know about Epstein. We know about blackmail, and he just settled the $290 million, or lawyers for victims just settled the $290 million lawsuit against J.P. Morgan, because J.P. Morgan knew what he was up to and played an integral role in financing him. So at this point, our government needs to acknowledge that Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking kids, and we need indictments on a number of perpetrators and procurers. And I've recently started a nonprofit organization called Epstein Justice, and it's EpsteinJustice.com. EpsteinJustice.com.
Yeah, the link's below for anybody who wants to check it out.
And that's where I'm at now, is I'm trying to turn all these things that I've written about into activism.
Okay. And so the purpose of the nonprofit is is it just to essentially just justice for the victims?
Yes, we need two things from our government. It's interesting. Not one single federal representative has called for an investigation into Epstein, even though we know there's a bunch of perpetrators and we know the names of a bunch of perpetrators.
Yeah. How is that possible, other than, what we, I guess, probably all think, which is that they're all just, these are their pals, essentially.
Well, it shows that our federal legislators, regardless of what we might think of them, really have shied away from this. So we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that's what Epstein justice is about. We've already we started with a petition that's got 36,600 signatures, and then we put on a demonstration across the street from the Maxwell trial when that travesty of a trial was going down. What we need now is the Department of Justice to start indicting the little fish. The little fish are guilty. The thing about child trafficking is it carries a 15-year to life sentence. So you could pile that up on a bunch of these procurers and they would roll over on the perps. And we know who the perps are anyway. And so we need accountability. Our government has to show us accountability for these perpetrators and procurers. And as Americans, we need to know why our government is covering this up. And because our government is covering up all these crimes committed by the Epstein perpetrators, in legal terminology, that would be aiding and abetting child trafficking. So
yeah. And in your opinion, what is the reason why? Like, do you have opinions on like why they have little to, I mean, I guess I say no interest in any of this?
Yes. And I wrote about it in the Franklin scandal, and I wrote about it in Confessions of a DC Madam. Our politicians, a lot of them are blackmailed. A lot of them will gladly make Faustian pacts to become rich and powerful, but a lot of them are blackmailed. And we have a system now where I believe that primary checks and balances are blackmail. And then there's the other politicians that are willing to sell their soul, and they'll do anything. So we've got both kinds. And if we bore into Epstein, I mean, our government has enacted policies that cause great wealth polarization. During the pandemic, millions of Americans lost everything. Yeah. But a new billionaire was minted every day. And our government has also enacted legislation that tramples on our constitutional rights. And child abuse is pandemic. According to the Center for Disease Control, child abuse is pandemic in the United States. And a conservative figure is more than 50 million boys and girls are molested as minors. So this is something that we have to bore into. I think if we get the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it's just not filled with political hacks, and we auger into this issue, we will come across the cesspool that is our government that enacts all these laws that really only hurt Americans.
Right. And is there maybe like not a case, but maybe like a claim to be made that should they do this Reconciliation Commission, the stuff that they're going to find would just be like, you know, it would just like rock the nation to the core if they found out the extent to which this is happening?
I think it probably would, but I mean, do we want our children? I'm kind of old now. I don't have any children, but do we want our children growing up with a government that protects child molesters? That is something we have to ask ourselves. Would we trust anyone who is aiding and abetting child trafficking, or any group who is aiding and abetting child trafficking? So how can we trust our government? And battles like this, it's going to require the will of the American public, because they can be won, like civil rights. It was a battle and it took a long time, but it was a battle that was ultimately won. So we have the internet now, which can expedite these battles, and we have to use the internet. And ultimately, we put on one demonstration. Epstein justice is non-partisan. We have no affiliation whatsoever with any parties. I have no affiliation whatsoever with the Democrats or the Republicans. And we accept the right, the left, and whatever creed or race. Epstein justice is all inclusive. compared to QAnon. And I don't want to be compared to QAnon. According to QAnon theology, Donald Trump was going to save the children. And Donald Trump couldn't even indict the Epstein perpetrators. Yeah. So how is he going to save the children?
Yeah. And you have, obviously what you consider evidence of all of this stuff. And yet they only obviously found one person guilty of all this stuff, Ghislaine Maxwell, right? Which,
yes.
And what are your thoughts on that? The fact that that's all they're willing to do and kind of hoping to brush us under the.
Well, that's where the American people have to come in and say, no, that's not right. The New York Times published an article on 6 procurers for Epstein, 6 procurers, which are really pimps for Epstein. And Ghislaine Maxwell was named, but it's right there in the New York Times. There's 5 of them that are named. And why aren't they indicted? And as I said earlier, if our Justice Department was going after this, like it would a RICO, RICO is Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization, which is what the feds use to take the mafia down. What would happen is the little fish would get indicted on multiple counts of child trafficking and they'd roll over on the big fish. It would be that simple. And then we'd eventually, hopefully, get our government back.
Yeah. And I guess the contention is that the people who would initiate that would be essentially snitching on themselves to a degree.
Whatever it's going to take, that's what we have to do. The government at this point has gotten so corrupt, and a major symptomology of that is the protection of child molesters. How can we allow our government to protect child molesters?
Yeah, and it's like it's so out in the open at this point. Like the stuff with Jeffrey Epstein it's literally become an actual joke. Right? Like the whole, he didn't kill himself, wink, blah, blah, blah. Like it's almost like a meme at this point. It's so commonplace.
Well, the media loves to, here's the thing about our mainstream media. It loves to pump out salacious dirt about Jeffrey Epstein. But it doesn't really call for justice. The mainstream media I'm aware of a lot of articles written about Epstein. And I have not seen one article published in the mainstream media that calls for justice. That really demonstrates that both our mainstream media and our government are run by ethical eunuchs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way. And I guess you said, I've heard you say it, but 90% of the media is run by essentially
6 corporations.
6 corporations run 90% of the media, and assuming that they're kind of to a degree in cahoots with one another. So,
well, the thing about that is the Sherman Antitrust Act allows the government to break up monopolies. So these 6 titanic conglomerates could be broken up with the Sherman Antitrust Act, but our government isn't using the Sherman Antitrust Act against them. So I think that there is some kind of collusion where, okay, you don't use the Sherman Antitrust Act against us, and we'll curtail it on things like Jeffrey Epstein.
Right, kind of do. And you think that there's actual conversations to this extent being had? As overt as this?
I think that there's a lot of good people in the mainstream media. Why haven't they called for justice? Yeah. And it's pretty much that simple. I think that, that really does demonstrate that there's I believe that there's some kind of collusion between the government and the media for sure.
Yeah. And I think I'd have to bring this up in just light of this and everything that's happening in the last few weeks. So do you have any thoughts on Sound of Freedom?
I have yet to see Sound of Freedom, but my friends have seen it. Some of my friends have seen it, and they said it's a good movie. The government is trying to, the media is trying to tag it as a QAnon manifestation. I don't know. I have yet to see it, but I'm going to see it.
I haven't seen it either, but I know people who have seen it, and there's nothing QAnon apparently about the movie. The only QAnon linkage is Jim Caviezel, who's the star of the movie, has kind of been on given interviews about like adrenochrome and stuff, essentially, that he does believe in that. So they're just using that one point to essentially smear the entire message.
The thing about adrenochrome is kind of interesting. I'll give you the etymology of that. It comes from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And now in the Franklin scandal, one of the victims, Paul Benassi, said that he was at a snuff film and someone introduced themselves as Hunter Thompson. Now, if you're going to participate in a snuff film, you would not introduce your real name. At least I don't think so.
Yeah,
that'd be seismically stupid. And then Rusty Nelson, who was a blackmail photographer for the Franklin trafficking network, and that I have a lot of documentation on. I mean, but here's a guy that's a blackmail photographer. He takes pictures of adults and children in compromising positions. So he's not the paragon of ethics. And on one radio show, he said that Hunter Thompson was at doing something. And so I made it easy for him. I gave him pictures of 5 different writers. Instead of 5 completely different people, I gave him pictures of 5 writers. And he still couldn't pick Hunter Thompson, who looks rather unique.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
And this was one of the figures in the Franklin scandal?
Yeah, Rusty Nelson.
Okay.
He was one of the blackmail photographers. I mean, I can prove that he was there. I mean, but here's someone, he's a blackmail photographer.
Right.
I mean, he's not, as I said earlier, he's not going to be the paragon of ethics. But I'm glad that he talked to me. He's on the unctuous side. And when we get together, I really felt like I had to take a protracted shower afterwards. But he gave me a lot of great information that did pan out. But then he also lied to me, too. So, and with investigations like that, you're dealing with people that lack ethics. And so one has to be cautious when they moving forward on investigations. Right. And with Rusty Nelson, the only time I used what he said is when it was heavily corroborated.
Right. And so I imagine, were you at first, when you started getting into this stuff, were people calling you like a conspiracy theorist? Like, was that kind of used to deride you a bit?
I've been called a conspiracy theorist since then. I'm not, and my friends were kind of amazed that I jumped into this, because I wasn't a big conspiracy guy. I mean, I never really bought the magic bullet in the JFK assassination. I never bought that, but and I knew a little about the mind control stuff, but that was about as deep as I went. So this has been a learning experience. And when I went to the mainstream media with the Franklin scandal, that's when I started hearing the conspiracy theorist tag. Now, what's really interesting about that is in 1967, the CIA released a memorandum because a lot of people weren't buying what the Warren Commission was selling. And the CIA decided that they had to do something about that. So they disseminated this memo to editors and people with influence. And I think I've got it posted on my website at nickbryantnyc.com. And the memo said that we're going to have to make people that don't believe in the Warren Commission, the conclusions of the Warren Commission, we're going to call them conspiracy theorists.
Really?
Yes. And then there was a bunch of bullet points about, how to make sure, or how to disparage conspiracy theorists. So that, and what's really interesting about that is this was 1967. And after that memo, the term conspiracy theorist was used minimally in papers like the Washington Post and the New York Times. And then it exponentially, the use of conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory exponentially exploded. So when people are, and I do admit some things are very out there. I try to approach everything agnostically. but there are some things that are very out there. I mean, the Franklin scandal and Epstein are way out there.
Well, that's, I mean, I'd say those are the main ones. So could you just give a quick, some people might not actually know what the Franklin scandal is. If you could just maybe give, everybody knows Epstein, but.
So the Franklin scandal gets its name from the Franklin Credit Union. And Lawrence E. King of Omaha ran the Franklin Credit Union. And he also ran an interstate pedophile network with a gentleman named Craig Spence, who lived in Washington, D.C. I talked about Spence's house being wired for audiovisual blackmail. Spence was a CIA asset. I think King was too, but I can show that Spence was a CIA asset. And those two ran a huge pedophile network.
And this is in the 80s?
In the 80s, yeah. And I believe in the 70s and 80s, I believe that it was larger than Epstein's. Epstein had like a 25-year run, and the Franklin trafficking network had about a 10-year run. But the Franklin network mass produced a lot of child pornography. These were really evil guys. And King eventually got busted for embezzling $40 million from the Franklin Credit Union. And a Nebraska Senate subcommittee was perplexed about that because King hadn't been audited, and the Franklin Credit Union hadn't been audited in 4 years. And first of all, and second of all, it was supposed to have like $2.5 million in it. Not King wasn't supposed to have like $40 million.
Yeah.
So they formed a subcommittee. And prior to forming the subcommittee, and victims had gone to social services. And actually, the police had investigated King and the trafficking of children. There were reports written about King either as a child trafficker or as a maker of child pornography. And the Omaha Police Department, that investigation was completely quashed. And it would come out that Omaha Police Chief Robert Wadman was one of the perpetrators. And ultimately, what happened is the Franklin Committee, after they congealed, these social services personnel went to them and they said, King is a thief, but he's also running an interstate pedophile network. So they started to investigate that. Law enforcement had been very successful at quashing everything. Both state and federal law enforcement had been. But
this is local law enforcement in Nebraska?
Yeah.
They were able to quash federal like investigations?
No, the feds quashed their own investigation.
Oh, gotcha.
So, and then the state quashed its own investigation. And at this point, there were a number of reports about King and the trafficking of children or the molesting of children or child pornography. So the Franklin Committee hired this amazing investigator. His name was Gary Caradori. And the FBI really, really fucked with him. And the FBI put a lot of pressure on the victims to recant accounts of their abuse. And there was a girl and a boy that wouldn't recant their accounts of abuse. But the girl, whose name was Alicia Owen, told Gary Caradori that the FBI was wanting to have her say that Gary Caradori had made scripts about the entire child abuse allegations. And so Caradori had his back to the wall, and he was an amazing investigator. He ran an investigation service or an investigation agency that had like 130 employees.
Oh wow!
And he had been a state patrol, a Nebraska State Patrol investigator too. He was and his thing was finding children that were enmeshed in prostitution.
Yeah, and like definitely like he had no scandals surrounding him. Like he was a very straight up guy.
Yeah. And then, but he realized at a certain point that he needed pictures of this because he really needed absolute proof, because he saw there were two grand juries that were called, a state and a federal grand jury. And I don't know if you're viewers or listeners know about the particulars of a grand jury, but grand juries are notoriously easy to corrupt. A special prosecutor is chosen, and he is the one, and grand jurors are just people that have shown up for jury duty that have been funneled to a grand jury. Grand jury.
Oh, is that all it is? Yeah, it's. Yeah. I've always, because I'm Canadian actually, so I don't think we even have grand juries in Canada. I've never. I don't know if it's a uniquely American thing, but I don't really recall them. Or it's not as big of a deal as it is here, because here it's always like grand jury like unseals some big indictment, and it seems like this very like.
It's like the gods of jurisprudence.
Yeah, kind of.
So yeah, there was a New York Supreme Court judge that said special prosecutors have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. So although there were a lot of victims, this grand jury just wore these grand jurors down. I'm talking about the state grand jury. And I've got the transcripts and exhibits to that grand jury. It's illegal for me to have them, but I have them, and they play an integral role in the Franklin scandal. I bring the reader right into a grand jury.
Yeah.
And I show how corrupt that grand jury was. And then the
and now like it's corrupt, like obviously the actual individual. How many jurors is it? A dozen? Same as.
Yeah.
And so they're just kind of like, they don't even know.
They're completely dependent upon the special prosecutor.
And they're just being lied to, essentially.
The special prosecutor chooses the witnesses and chooses the exhibits that are shown to them.
So it's basically like a trial. They go through a trial, just like a sealed trial.
There's no trial. It's not adversarial at all.
It's not adversarial. It's just a presentation, essentially.
Yes. It's basically a presentation by one guy. And in both these cases, both with the state and the federal grand juries, they were very, very corrupt. And the special prosecutors were very corrupt. And I believe that one of the special prosecutors was probably a pedophile for the federal grand jury investigation.
Jesus.
And these grand juries declared that not a single child had been abused. And they said it was a carefully crafted hoax. And then they pinned the hoax on a bunch of drug-addled kids. I mean, they didn't really name it, but they kind of insinuated that it was these drug-addled kids.
And how did they arrive at a bunch of children all somewhat independently having a similar story?
Well, they didn't account for that. I mean,
well, I think that was just like
it was just. I mean, it was fiction.
Yeah.
And but it did indict. There were two kids that refused to recant. One was Alicia Owen, and she was indicted on 8 counts of perjury by the state grand jury, which is 160 years. And then she was indicted on 8 counts of perjury from the federal grand jury, which is 40 years. And she was, and this is a 20-year-old girl,
yeah,
who'd been trafficked as an adolescent, who'd been through all kinds of humiliation.
This is literally her punishment for coming forward.
Degradation, yes. So she was looking at, and this kid is amazing. She was looking at 200 years in prison, but she refused to recant accounts of her abuse. She said, "I was abused, and I'm not gonna recant it." So that led to the longest criminal trial in Nebraska history. And Alicia got a pretty good lawyer, but the judge was corrupt. The special prosecutors or the prosecutors were corrupt, and they corrupted the jury. In my book, I really take that apart, that whole jury or that courtroom hearing. I completely take it apart. I mean, evidence that wasn't introduced into the trial is being planted in the jurors where the jurors are deliberating, and then the jurors would ask for exhibits, but they wouldn't be given exhibits. So there's so much malfeasance in that trial. But anyway, Alicia was found guilty and sentenced to between 9 and 15 years in prison, and the authorities really tried to destroy her because they put her in solitary confinement for 2 years.
For 2 years?
I mean, we're talking a kid.
Yeah, it's like a kid who...
We're talking a kid.
A kid who was just charged for, what, perjury?
for perjury. Yes.
Yeah.
And now they just barely got Alicia. They thought Alicia would be a slam dunk. They thought that they would have the FBI agents testify and this guy testify and that guy testify, and that Alicia would be a slam dunk. But actually, those jurors were deliberating for 3 days. And on the first night of the deliberation, CBS's 48 Hours ran an episode calling Alicia a liar. I mean, it was an amazing synchronicity.
Yeah. Do you think that's a coincidence or no? I mean, I don't know if I believe in coincidences, but
that's a very strange coincidence.
Yeah.
And a lot of the jurors had said that 48 Hours played an integral role in them deciding to convict Alicia.
They were allowed to watch. Aren't they like sequestered though? They were allowed to watch TV.
No, they weren't sequestered.
Oh.
And now, because there was another boy named Paul Benassi who was indicted on 3 counts of perjury. So he was looking at 60 years, and he refused to recant to his abuse. And because the Nebraska authorities just barely got Alicia by the skin of their teeth, they dropped all the perjury charges against Paul. And Paul basically said the same things that Alicia said, that Alicia had been molested by Omaha Police Chief Robert Wadman, and that the publisher of the Omaha World Herald, Harold Anderson, liked little boys that were like 7 or 8 years old, and that he'd been molested by Harold Anderson.
And did the two of them know each other?
Yes. Well, they knew each other from the party, the quote unquote,
right? Because they basically had these like crazy parties where people, and they would be flown around the country.
Yes. Paul was flown around a lot more than Alicia. Alicia was kind of like part-time, whereas Paul was full-time.
Right. And then the investigator, Gary Caradori.
So Gary Caradori, he saw what was happening with the grand jury. He was called before the grand jury, and he could see that it was really corrupt. And he decided that the only thing that he could do was get pictures of what went down. And what happened with Gary Caradori is he had a Cessna, and he flew from Lincoln, Nebraska, where he was headquartered, to Chicago. And he met Rusty Nelson, who I've talked about previously, the blackmail photographer.
Yeah.
And Rusty gave him blackmail pictures. Now, other than Rusty saying that, I have 4 other sources that say that Gary Caradori got pictures in Chicago. And he was flying back to Lincoln, and his plane exploded in a cornfield in Lee County, Illinois.
What are the odds?
And the pictures were never found. The pictures that he acquired were never found.
And the assumption is someone put some sort of like bomb on his plane?
Well, you know, Cessnas generally don't break apart in mid-flight. It's highly unlikely. Actually, I talked to some people that were aeronautic experts, and they said that would be next to impossible for a Cessna to just kind of disintegrate in midair.
And was his son with him on that?
His son was with him too, and both of them were killed. And then the corrupt grand juries came out with their hoax, saying that the child abuse allegations were a hoax, and then the media went with it, and the New York Times went with it, the Washington Post went with it.
This is like I mean, talk of conspiracies. Like, this seems like a conspiracy of conspiracies. This is truly like the timing, and like how, like, you know, that his plane exploding is clearly a message to anybody involved. Like,
yeah, there's a Chinese proverb, kill one man and silence 1,000. And in Gary Caradori's case, kill a man and his son and silence a community. When I started investigating the Franklin scandal, it was like I was there in 2002. And it was the last adjudication for it was in 1991. And so I was there like 12 years after a lot of it went down. And I felt like people were so frightened to talk about it. I felt like I was writing an expose on the KGB and Stalinist Russia. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how frightened. And then in the heartland of America, that's how frightened people were.
That's pretty unreal. So who was all punished for, other than obviously Larry King, like in terms of the Franklin scandal, like whatever justice came from it?
There was no justice. King was put away for 10 years.
But for a financial crime.
For embezzling $40 million. And when he got out, he had a no-show job at a BMW dealership in Virginia. And since then, he's tried to ingratiate himself into 3 groups that would give him access to children.
Still?
Yes.
He's still alive?
Yes. And he's a guy like Lawrence King. He's a super predator. And he's like a great white shark looking for kids. And he got enmeshed with Granville Academy, and I heard about that. And Granville Academy isn't even a school. It takes lower socioeconomic children on field trips.
Jesus.
So I put an end to that. And then next he surfaced with the Washington Redskins event committee. And then I put the kibosh on that. And then he surfaced with Opera Nova. Opera Nova. And it's it serves a number of functions, but it teaches lower socioeconomic kids how to sing. And then I got him kicked out of there. But there are people in the government that know he's a super predator. And it's up to me as a journalist to try to protect these kids by making sure that he doesn't get into these organizations.
Like, you literally have to just follow him. Like, what do? You just periodically check in on him just to see?
Yeah, I keep a close eye on him. Whenever he sticks his malignant head up, and I think he's stuck it up recently. I've got to look into it. Whenever he sticks his malignant head up,
and he's always he's trying to just get involved with it. That's crazy. But so he's never been convicted of any sexual crime, so there's no registry, nothing.
No.
And that's by design, in your opinion. Like,
that is by design, and it's and again with Epstein justice. Here is another case where there are people in the government that know that this guy is a super predator, and they're just allowing him to prey on children.
Just because in their mind, like, essentially unraveling that ball will cause them so many more problems, that they're just allowing this kind of like evil to just happen.
Yeah, I mean, if he gets out of control, I mean, he'd probably end up dead like Craig Spence, who was Craig Spence was the other guy that ran the Franklin pedophile network, and he was in Washington, D.C. He was a lobbyist, and he had a mansion that was wired for audiovisual blackmail as a CIA asset, and he committed suicide. On the internet, it's speculated that he was suicided, but his finances had been pulled from him, and he had AIDS. And I think I think that dark, malignant corner of our intelligence that perpetrates things like the Franklin scandal and Epstein told him that either he should kill himself or they would help. And he ended up in the Ritz-Carlton in Boston in a tuxedo, and he took an overdose of nortriptyline. And next to him was an article that talked about CIA people being called before judiciary bodies. And there was a grand jury in Washington, D.C. that covered this up too. And Spence had been subpoenaed by that grand jury. And so I think at that point, and Spence was getting a lot of newspaper press on him, just as Epstein was getting a lot of press. And if you're a blackmail artist, you cannot afford to get a lot of blackmail press, a lot of press, because people are going to know exactly what you're up to at that point.
Right, kind of gives it up.
Both Spence and Jeffrey Epstein lost their utility at that point. And what's interesting, going back to the grand juries, there was a grand jury that in Florida, a state grand jury that looked into Epstein, and the Palm Beach Police Department had the reports of 5 victims and corroborating statements, but they knew of 17 more victims. So they were aware of 22 victims. And that Barry Kirshner, the guy who ran the special prosecutor of that grand jury, only called one of those kids. And he deconstructed.
And has he ever given an explanation as to?
He has not. No.
And no, I guess he's just like, I don't owe anyone an explanation for any of this stuff.
Unfortunately, the media really hasn't asked him for an explanation. And then the feds, with the Epstein situation, the feds had a list of 36 underage victims. And I've got the list. And Alexander Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida, oversaw that case. And he eventually became Trump's labor secretary. And when he was being vetted for that position, I guess the Trump people asked him why he didn't go after Epstein. And he said that I was told that Epstein was intelligence and to leave him alone. It was above my pay grade. And he's never recanted that.
Really?
And now here's the really troubling thing. A U.S. attorney, there's only two people constitutionally in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the president and one is the attorney general.
So it's essentially like a level of corruption that's...
Yes, that's the level of corruption.
Permeates every corner of the government, basically.
That's why Epstein justice is so important at this point. We've got to clean our government out of this perfidious stench. And it's really up to us as Americans.
And is it a matter of resources for Epstein justice in order to kind of see through your goal on this? Like
we just launched last week, and we need as much help as we possibly can. We've got a good staff, but we need a bigger staff, and we've got a great board of advisors, but we need a bigger board of advisors, and we've gotten some money, but we need some more resources. So. And the goal is to have nonviolent, non-politically partisan demonstrations, and then ultimately a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That's what we have to do. If Americans can't answer the bell to this, they're just going to have to let their children live in this very corrupt world.
And now, I mean, I would imagine if there was, the Franklin scandal, I'm sure there was something before that. Then there was Epstein. Is there something similar to this, in your opinion, that must be going on? Or is this becoming so just like reaching the public awareness that they're now having to figure out new ways to blackmail people, I guess, at those levels?
The thing about politicians is our politicians are highly sexed and very arrogant. And nothing makes people stupid like sex and arrogance and greed too. Those three things make the smartest of people very, very stupid. So with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is a very smart guy, but when it comes to lower chakra predilections, he just can't help himself.
Yeah. And again, like, when we talk about this conspiracy stuff or, corruption, you're like, he's one of the people implicated in this whole thing, right?
Yeah, he
like,
was.
How is that supposed to work? Like, is the as crazy it is, like, because people have no problem saying, like, put Trump in jail. Like, that's half the country's like, yeah, we'll put a former president in jail. But it seems like when they get to this one, they're like, surely we can't put a president in jail.
Well, Epstein was providing women to Clinton when he was in the White House. And Clinton was certainly at his island. I do not know whether or not these women were of the age of consent. I do not know.
Yeah.
But think about it. If you're a victim and you've been molested by Bill Clinton, I mean, how are you going to come forward? You would be terrified.
Of course. And I mean, there have been women who came forward when he was governor, right?
Yes.
And they're like, they've been smeared endlessly.
They've been excoriated.
Yeah.
they've been excoriated.
Now, with the, I'm going to open up the phone lines, everybody, very shortly. If you have any questions for Nick, just a couple of questions. So, are people able to donate anonymously to, or? And I ask that because, say there is someone who has, a large amount of resources, right? Could someone give you $10 million and it be anonymous, or are they going to be on a list somewhere?
I would have to talk to our attorneys, but I could look into that.
Well, I just wonder in the sense that maybe there's some powerful person who would like to support you without drawing the ire of, and the attention of these people who are obviously
No,
powerful.
I understand that.
Yeah.
And I would have to, I'd have to talk to our attorney about that.
Okay. Yeah. That was just
but I'm sure that they probably can give anonymously. I'm surmising that they can.
Okay. And then so the phone lines are open, everybody, if you want to call 1-888-949-2969. So do you get threats and stuff? Surely.
I had my first time out in Nebraska, I had a death threat. And there's been definitely harassment since then. But my thinking on it was, this is so evil that it has to be stopped. And, if they're going to kill me, they're going to kill me.
Yeah. And
that was my thinking.
I mean, that's probably the best way to go about it, because the Conspiracy of Silence, the documentary, that you can check it out. So it was fully produced, correct? Actually, you know what? We got a call. Let's take a call, and we'll put a pin in that and get back. Just one moment, please.
Actually, you know what? We got a call.
Hey,
Let's take a call.
Hey, can you turn down your thing, please?
Yeah, I got her on mute.
Hey,
good now?
1 second. All right, you are... Hold on. All right, you're on with Nick. Bryant, go ahead, caller.
Hey, Nick. First off, I found out about you through Tim Dillon back when he was at Gas Digital, so like 2016 era. I'm only mentioning that because I like how you're occupying the foray as a guest on multiple comedy type shows like Matt and Shane and War Mode. That's pretty cool. I like that.
Right.
And my question was, I've been not like trying to figure out, but how did they do this operation, especially with how people like accuse the Clintons of like trafficking children from like third world shitholes like Haiti and Western Sub-Saharan Africa? And do you think there's a way how now they're in the social landscape, there's a whole, we need to protect, people of color and all that stuff, but nobody wants to say that like, oh, leftist politicians.
You're just saying it's kind of hypocritical of them?
Yeah, that, but I'm also trying to figure out like, how is it like they specifically just go into these backwards cesspool kids?
I mean, they take advantage of people who are obviously like, under.
The thing about that is 85% of the children that are trafficked in the United States are American children.
85%. So there you go.
85%. So traffickers are very slick on how to get children. In the Franklin scandal, traffickers were getting kids out of Boys Town, an orphanage, very famous orphanage, and some other institutions. And Epstein had a little army out there trolling for victims. So these predators are very, very savvy about getting children. They do not have a problem getting children.
Yeah, and I imagine with Ghislaine Maxwell, like she had a team of people like who were. Yeah. Was there like a hierarchy? Like was she like essentially on par with Epstein, or was she just below him, kind of in terms of their?
I think that she was his chief lieutenant.
Okay, and again, all the people who were underneath her, not a single party has even been threatened with anything.
None of them. I mean, it's a real travesty of American justice.
Yeah,
that's what happens when the media is run by a bunch of ethical eunuchs. If the media was calling for justice, we could probably have justice. But the media isn't going to call for justice. It's interesting. Our country pays great lip service to children as its most precious resource.
Of course.
But children, there's 2 or 3 million of them that aren't insured. They're the fast growing segment of the homeless population. At least 22% of them are growing up below the poverty threshold. So our government really, in reality, hasn't done a great job with children. And before I got into this whole trafficking stuff, I wrote a book about lower socioeconomic children in America. And it was called America's Children Triumph or Tragedy. And I've written a number of articles about lower socioeconomic children in America. I'm very sensitive to children's issues. And in that book, we showed that, like, if a child is born with a low birth weight and they're subjected to 5 years of continuous poverty, if they're white, their IQ is going to be 90. If they're black, their IQ is going to be 85. So they're pretty much out of the game at that point. They can get like a menial job. When kids are homeless, it really decimates them developmentally. And as I said earlier, children are the fast growing segment of the homeless population. So America, what we see with the kids that are below the poverty threshold and homeless, I look at that as like a wholesale destruction of children. And I look at Franklin and Epstein as a retail destruction of children. Where there is a wholesale destruction of children, there's going to be a retail destruction of children. Yeah.
Have you ever thought, like, in terms of the Franklin scandal, like, that seems so prime to be like a film, the story, and it's just like it's crazy because you'd think that, I guess the problem is that there's the same people who would be making the film as the same people who want to protect the people who would be essentially the villains.
We have pitched the Franklin scandal all over Hollywood. And actually, we had a big Hollywood legend who got behind it for a while. And we could not get it done.
Just can't.
The world is still not ready for the Franklin scandal.
It's crazy. Okay, we got another caller. One moment, please. Hello. Thanks for calling Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, this is Kevin. I've talked to you.
Hey, what's up? Just
sorry for spamming your phone when.
All right, you are.
Repeat episode.
Yeah, you are. You're on with Nick. Go ahead.
Hey, I just had a question. People in the chat were asking too. True Detective season 1, is that based off of real stuff? I've heard they had to like edit certain names and places, but I've heard that True Detective 1 is pretty consistent with all the things you've been talking about.
Actually, the Franklin scandal is mentioned in True Detective. So, yes. And I remember when True Detective came out, I had friends approaching me saying, this guy ripped off the Franklin scandal. And then I found it kind of interesting that the Franklin scandal was actually named in one of those episodes.
Yeah. So
they moved it to Louisiana instead of Kansas.
Nebraska.
But when you look at wherever it was, it just seemed similar to the stuff that I've read about. And what do you think about the occult stuff that's involved with that? That's a little bit weird, and I haven't heard any comments about that so far. Do you think they really believe in a lot of that, or like is it just like an excuse?
I have not really looked into that or investigated it. There's people have told me things about it, but because I haven't investigated it, I don't really want to comment on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I totally understand that. That's a weird rabbit hole to go down with all that stuff. Thank you so much. Everyone loves you. You've been a great guest. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, caller. Are you able to say who the big Hollywood person was, or that's kind of
we kind of.
It's fine if not. I don't know.
I really started to dislike him at a certain point. So that it ended kind of acrimoniously.
Oh, okay.
His arrogance started to bother me a little bit.
All right. Well, yeah.
So I'm going to refrain from naming.
Refrain. That's fine. That's fine. But
but I have named him in other interviews.
Oh, okay. So people can go.
If someone wants to dig through my podcasts or whatever, his name is floating around somewhere.
All right. All right. And so do you think that's dead in the water for the, because the Franklin scandal is just, it's literally unbelievable.
Well, right now, we've been approached by English company and from the UK, but I get approached all the time. There are producers that really want to do something with the Franklin scandal, really want to do something, and we always get to the very top, and it's generally an executive vice president that really wants to do it. And then the president of that particular company vetoes it. Right. I've got this UK company, and they've put out some really good stuff. And I was thinking I might have my best shot in the UK. So that relationship is relatively new. I'm just going to have to see what happens. But I have gotten my hopes up a number of times, thinking that it was going to happen, and my hopes were dashed kind of at the 11th hour.
Yeah, that's generally the film industry for the most part. As someone who's on that side of it too, it's just a lot of times you're like a lot of talk, and then until there's action, you're like you can't even really look too much into it.
And I'll say this, that the Franklin scandal was optioned by Magnolia Pictures, and Magnolia Pictures couldn't get anything done with it.
Right.
So
does it ever like a little that conspiracy guy in the back of your brain go, maybe they're optioning it so that they don't make it?
Not with them, no.
Okay. I don't know Magnolia Pictures.
But I do know, and this is I've got the recording that's on my podcast. There was an independent studio, and the vice president was really into the story. And he wanted to do it. And I met him twice in LA, and within 5 or 10 minutes of me leaving his office after a very good meeting, he was given a very strange phone call that was voice modulated.
Really?
And yeah. And he was ultimately threatened, and it was kind of weird because he's a kind of a swashbuckling Hollywood executive type, and with a sports car and beautiful girlfriend, and he just kind of disintegrated. I told him it was former FBI agents that did security for that particular studio, and I told the vice president, I said, do not get those FBI guys involved, because it was the FBI that covered up the Franklin trafficking network. I said, do not get those FBI guys involved. And the first thing he did was go to those FBI guys. So I think he brought a lot of that upon
You'd almost
himself.
have to make this film in secret. Like, honestly, you'd have to make the film in secret and then just release it. Like you'd almost have, that's the only way. Like, it would have to be someone not in Hollywood that just finances it. You make it off the grid and then just put it out. Because, I mean, based on how The Sound of Freedom's doing, this thing would be gangbusters.
I think that it would be. And despite the mainstream media attacking it as a QAnon conspiracy, I mean, the mainstream media has really, really attacked this.
Like majorly. And to the point, like, there's a lot of lies, because there was a lot of posts saying like, oh, they're just buying up all, the reason it's doing so well is because donors are buying up all the tickets, but the theaters are actually empty. But I know people who have gone to see it, and they're like, the theater was not empty. Like, the theater was very full.
I've got to see it in the next week or so. But as I said, my friends that have seen it have thought it was a good movie.
Yeah. And so I guess just out of my curiosity, what does the person who thinks like this Franklin scandal, like, is there anybody who's like, yeah, it's actually BS or whatever, to like those kids were all lying? Like, are there people out there who are on the record of saying like,
well,
no
actually,
conspiracy here?
Here's what's really troubling is Wikipedia. A bunch of unscrupulous editors have taken over the Franklin child abuse allegations page, and made it completely nonsensical, and it's locked down. And if you go to my website, nickbryantnyc.com, I'll show you excerpts. There's been battles waged over that page. And these fascist editors are not going to let anything involving the Franklin child abuse allegations sound reasonable. I mean, it's like a devil worshiping, feces eating type shit. And actually, I tried to go the route of legitimate route of talking to editors that were not these editors. And I was told that they're like the worst editors in Wikipedia, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, can you help me? So finally, I decided to call Jimmy Wales.
Jimmy Wales is the founder of
Wikipedia. And I called him, and he was very congenial. I'm actually going to be putting that conversation up on my website. And he was very congenial. He said he'd look into it. And he said, he gave me his email, and he said that I should email him some stuff. And I emailed him some stuff. He never got back to me on that. And I called him again, and about a week and a half later, and then he texted me saying that he'd gotten the Franklin scandal and he was looking into it. And then I called him about a week and a half later after that, and he gave me a text saying that it seems to me it's a hoax. So Jimmy obviously,
the founder of Wikipedia said that the Franklin scandal is a hoax.
Yeah,
the whole thing. He's just
after he said he read the Franklin scandal. Now, there's no way that someone can read the Franklin scandal and say it's a hoax. I just have too much corroboration in that book. And some of the documents were so mind-blowing that we put them in the back of the book.
So what do you think's going on there?
Well, and this is why Epstein justice is so important. What we have is a dark, malignant corner of our intelligence that panders children to our freak politicians and leaders. And that's one thing that, I mean, the American people are very polarized now between right and left and religions and colors and things like that. But the one thing that could unite the American people and where they would really demand change is if this dark, malignant corner of our intelligence was outed and we could demonstrate that they are pandering children, they are trafficking children and pandering them to our powerful officials.
And that's just
that's what Epstein justice is about. We're going to bore down into that and show America the sewer, the sewer that is governing us.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I can tell you, not a lot of people. I think really know the extent of any of this stuff. All right, I got another caller. One moment, please. Hello, thanks for calling Low Value Mail.
Hey, how you doing?
1 second, please, while we patch you through. And all right, you are on with Nick.
Hey, what's going on, fellas?
Hey, Todd.
I have a question, maybe two, we'll see. But I was just wondering if you have any opinions on that former Deputy Sheriff John Mark Dugan, who claims to have around 470 videos of Jeffrey Epstein's stash, I guess you could call it. And he's now in Russia, and he's, I guess a bit of trivia, he's the fourth American citizen to receive asylum in Russia. Do you have any opinions or thoughts on him?
Yeah, he was a former Florida lawman. I think that if he had that evidence, I mean, he's been given immunity in Russia. If he had that or asylum in Russia, so ultimately immunity, and there's nothing that Putin would like more than to show those videos. So I think that if he actually had those videos, they would have been shown by now.
Okay, so you think he's bluffing, essentially?
It doesn't make any sense. Putin's
not
going
to put
to
words
protect
in your
him.
mouth.
Putin's going to protect him, and so why doesn't he edify the world if he has the goods?
No, fair enough. And then just one more quick question. Do you have any opinion on the allegations of Katie Johnson and the story of Maria, who is a girl that was abducted from Waterbury, Connecticut in 1993?
I've dug into that pretty intensely. And
okay.
I found Katie Johnson. I know where she's living, and but she's unwilling to talk at this point. And I've sent her a couple of emails, and if she's the victim that she says she is, she's obviously been through some difficulties. I try to, with the work that I do, I'm continually coming across victims of horrific abuse, and I try not to push them.
Right.
And it's kind of a minefield because you never know how some of them are going to react too. So you've got to walk gingerly when you're dealing with victims of horrific sexual abuse. But I know about that case, and I would love for her to talk to me. There are people that she's talked to who believe her, but and Lisa Bloom was her attorney, and Lisa Bloom, I guess she was staying in a hotel in LA, and Lisa Bloom picked her up and sprung a press conference on her. I mean, that's how it's come to me. And then at that point, she was very frightened and started to recant. So
yes, because I do believe her life was threatened. Katie Johnson.
Yeah, she got some phone calls, and that's how it's coming to me. And like, it took me a long time to find her, but I found her, and but she doesn't really want to talk, and I'm not going to push her.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah, no, I don't. Just trying to pick your brain a little bit.
Okay.
Appreciate your work.
But she is out there. She is out there, and actually, she's cut and pasted a life for herself. She's got she's doing well in a certain vocation that isn't involved in the sex industry, and she's got a boyfriend. I mean, I've looked at her Facebook page, and she seems to be doing
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's good at least. I mean, not a completely destroyed life.
Yeah.
No, just thank you for your work.
You're welcome.
All right.
I'll let you guys go.
Thanks for calling.
Onward.
Yeah, thanks for that caller. So, is there, like, speaking of that, of the previous caller, but like, is there any ongoing kind of campaign for anybody who like might want to speak out to kind of keep them silent? Like, because there must be, like, how many victims in at least the Epstein thing are there specifically?
There's a lot of victims.
Like hundreds, thousands?
Definitely hundreds. Could go into the thousands. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, but like, for any one of them that might right now say, you know what, I've had a change of heart. I actually want to go like speak out about this stuff. Like, is there anybody who's kind of like making sure that they remain silent either by paying them off or like how do you get so many people to just not say anything? Or is there just like the fear of like, look what we did to Jeffrey Epstein?
I believe that only 240 victims have come forward for that settlement, for the settlement from Epstein's estate. So there's hundreds out there.
And why wouldn't they come forward if there's all this money? Like, because you said, what, $290 million?
Because they've been threatened and terrified, and they're terrified of their perpetrators. The perpetrators in the Epstein and the Franklin cases, they're all the way up the food chain. Like I said, Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney for Southern Florida, he was told to stand down. And there's only two people that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One's the president, one's the attorney general.
Who was the president at the time?
At the time, it was Obama.
Obama. So he was either that or whoever Obama's attorney general was told him.
Yeah.
That's very, very crazy stuff.
But four administrations, and two of them been Republican, two of them been Democrat. So obviously this is going on both sides of the aisle. If this was just a Republican or a Democrat thing, the other would be attacking. But this is something that affects all our legislators.
Yeah. I have a question from Matt. He's one of the patrons of the show, but he says, why doesn't Ghislaine Maxwell just come out and name names considering she's already in prison? Is it just...
Ghislaine Maxwell made a deal. Like Lawrence E. King made a deal.
And do you know the details of it?
I don't know the details, but I'm extrapolating that Ghislaine Maxwell was told, you keep your mouth shut and you'll eventually get out of prison. You've got all that money waiting for you. You saw what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. And then she was, and the travesty of that is Ghislaine Maxwell was integral to the trafficking of hundreds of underage girls. And she was indicted on one count of child trafficking.
It's crazy.
And the four witnesses that were called to testify against her, they had only been molested by Maxwell and Epstein. They had never, the girls that had been molested by like a bunch of the power brokers, none of them were called. That was a carefully choreographed trial.
And it's interesting in light of the whole, like the Alicia Owen thing, how they charged her with every possible charge to just stack on the years, right?
And
like,
you know what's amazing about Alicia is she's an amazing human being, and actually she's an associate director of Epstein Justice.
Oh, okay. How long did she spend in jail?
In totality, I think she spent like 9 years in prison.
So basically, they gave her that's crazy for.
But she got a college degree. She's happily married. She's got a nice house. She's an amazing person. She's not filled with hate. She realized that hate was not going to help her. Yeah. So she's made peace with it all. Although, as I said, she's an associate director of Epstein Justice, and she really wants to pursue this.
Yeah, that's great. I have a question here from Bill. It says, does Nick know about Marc Dutroux and the infamous Belgian pedophile ring he was part of that involved politicians and other powerful people?
Yeah, I know the Marc Dutroux case very well. Marc Dutroux was part of a power broker pedophile network, and he murdered, I believe it was 4 girls. Some of these guys are major sadists, but the malfeasance there was pretty amazing. And actually there were people in law enforcement that came out and said that this is a cover-up. So it's definitely, and I mean, when you get cops to come out and say that, like Michael Ryder, the Palm Beach Police Department chief, he came out and said this is a cover-up. But there's been a bunch of law enforcement people that are associated with Dutroux that have come out and said that this is a cover-up. And actually, there were like 200,000 Belgians that hit the streets in protest. And that's what we need in the United States of America. We need people to hit the streets and demand justice.
And it was effective in Belgium?
What's that?
It was effective, the protests? Or at least moved in the right direction?
Additional names have come out in Dutroux, but Dutroux was the one that has primarily been done the time.
Yeah.
But additional names came out.
And in terms of like the Franklin scandal, because obviously, or not obviously, but I guess the Epstein stuff was more of an international sex trafficking ring. Was the Franklin?
Yeah, I mean, it was primarily domestic, but
it was primarily.
Yeah, it trafficked. I mean, he bought kids and he bought young girls in Eastern Europe.
And like, how does that even work? Like, how do you buy? Like, how do you take it? You're like, what? Is Ghislaine Maxwell care for them? Like, how does that? How do they get into the country? Like, for me, I'm Canadian. Like, to come to America is a pain in the ass. Like, to live here it's a whole ordeal. Like, are they sponsoring them for visas? Like,
I have no idea of how they do it, but obviously, if the president and attorney general are willing to pull strings for someone,
yeah,
they're not going to have a very difficult time trafficking kids into the United States of America.
Right.
and people are, I hate to say this, but there are people that are willing to sell their children, and then you end up with a lot of children in orphanages, and they're very corrupt, and they're willing to sell the children. It's for these guys, like I said, they're super predators. They know how to get kids.
Yeah, and so coming up, so I guess you have you launched last week with the Epstein justice thing, and so what are the next steps with that, other than just getting awareness for it?
Epstein Justice, we're looking for volunteers with social media. You can contact us, epsteinjustice.com, and we're looking for resources at this point. And we just launched last week. As I said, we got a great team. We got a great board of advisors. We've got a solid plan, and we just need to grow it.
Okay.
At this point.
All right, we got sorry, I just got another caller here.
And we need your listeners, your viewers to help us.
Okay. One second, please. I got another caller here. Hello. Oh, we lost them. Yeah, I mean, it seems like a pretty. I mean, it's so crazy because the whole polarization of this thing. I know you were talking about the 200,000 people in Belgium, and I feel like if 200,000 people came out right now and did that. Oh, you can't hear. Oh, sorry. Hold on a second. Oh.
Danny, I can't.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh,
Sorry.
there we
There's
go.
something with. Okay. We have a caller here. Sorry about that. One moment, please. Hello. Thanks for calling Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
What's going on, Danny? It's
Hey,
Chad Turner.
Chad. How you doing, buddy? Chad, you're on with Nick. Go ahead.
How you doing, Nick?
Good. How you doing, Chad?
Can't complain, man. I hear the type of thing that you're talking about, and I was wondering if you had ever heard about this lady named Savali.
Who?
Savali?
Savali. Have you ever heard that name?
I have not. No.
Who is she, Chad?
Okay. I don't know. All right. So, like, I mentioned on the show before, I used to listen to this dude named David Wilcock. And he used to be talking about, at one point, there was this woman who came from, like pretty much, like, the deep levels of the Illuminati. Like, she had made it out, but she pretty much was, like, a child groomer. Like, yeah, see, I was honestly, I was really hoping that you did know about it. It's a lot to explain. But I mean, essentially, she, like, when he was talking about it, he just said that she was like grooming these children of these very rich people who was like essentially like giving away their children to this type of like abuse because they believed in some type of demonic type of stuff anyway, for real.
Like basically a cult, demonic stuff. But yeah, I've never heard of that name either.
That name does not ring a bell, but people won't give up their children. I know that.
Yeah.
That's
All right. Anything else, Chad?
No, that's it, man. I just wanted to know if you knew about that.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Have a good night.
So I was saying just before sorry, we got cut off. But so yeah, I was saying that like in terms of the Belgium stuff, like if 200,000 people went and protested in America right now, it would likely be painted by most of the media as like some QAnon rally, essentially, right? Like how can it be done and not framed when we're in such a like hyper partisan?
Well, the thing about it is, like with the civil rights movement, the people in the civil rights movement were painted as lunatics initially. And ultimately it grew and it grew and it grew and it broke through. And movements like these are not easy, but they're possible. History has shown that great change can occur if people get together. And it's going to be up to us to get together, whether we're on the right or the left, regardless of our religion, regardless of our race. We have to come together on this. And in the very least, we do not want, as I said earlier, to give our children a government that protects child molesters. We do not want to give our children that bait.
Yeah, which
And
seems
also,
like it seems like something there could be zero people who would disagree with, right?
yeah.
Like it's one of those things where you go, who's against this?
Well, I'm sure there's some government officials and pedophiles against it.
Sure,
but
well,
other than
sure,
that,
yeah. Besides the truly evil people,
a very small fraction of people. So that's what we need to do as Americans, and even people that aren't political can get involved in this because it's just doing the right thing. We need to do the right thing, and as I said earlier too, is our government is making laws that cause extreme wall polarization, that trample on our constitutional rights to privacy. That's part of the cesspool that governs us, that protects child molesters. If we bore into Epstein deep enough, we can clean out that cesspool.
Yeah, you brought up Kennedy obviously earlier, the magic bullet or whatever. But so
yeah.
I pretty recently they Biden resealed, or not resealed, but decided to keep the whole files from that sealed for, what was it, another 80 years or something, which my presumption, I think most people is that it just implicates the government. Do you think that'll be something with the Franklin scandal where like maybe one day when it's so far in the rear view mirror that they can admit it, or is it just like it's nothing they can admit until the whole system is toppled that enabled it?
Well, the thing about it is that dark, malignant corner of our intelligence is never going to admit that it's trafficking children. It's never going to admit.
And is it because they think that they're like, we're doing this for like a somewhat benevolent reason, like it's to protect the country, even in their minds? Like, is that what it is?
I think that some of them believe that at a certain level, but then a lot of them are just evil, malicious, malignant people that they enjoy. I mean, the reason why they're trafficking children a lot of the time is because they're pedophiles.
And but they you know, there must be so many. It just seems so hard to believe that there's people in government who you would think are, you know, they get into working for the government to help the country, and then they can just kind of look past this one little thing. They go, okay, that's just something that happens.
Well, there's 535 representatives. There's 100 senators. Not one of them has wanted an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. Not one of them has called for an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. That gives you an idea of the kind of corruption that we're dealing with.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that there's some good people in our government. I think a relatively small percentage that aren't compromised or have made Faustian pacts. Very small percentage, but even they won't call for an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein.
All right. We're going to wrap this up shortly. I have another caller here. Oh, no, just lost them. All right. You have a new book coming out, correct?
I do. Book's coming out in a couple of months. It's called The Truth About Watergate, A Tale of Extraordinary Lies and Liars.
Yes. And so how long you working on that for? A little bit, right? I heard you talking about it.
I've been working on it for a while. I had to put it down because I ghost wrote a book for someone, and I had to write some other stuff, but it's in galleys now, and it'll be published in a couple of months. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay. And like what, not to get totally off topic, because I know that the main kind of crux of this has been the Epstein stuff, but like, did you find a lot of new things in regards to the Watergate? Like,
well,
stuff that
at the heart of Watergate is a CIA sexual blackmail operation.
That's what it all comes down to, huh? Every time, just all of this stuff.
At the heart of Watergate. And it's amazing that most Americans don't even know about that.
I had no idea.
I prove in that book that at the heart of it is a CIA sexual blackmail operation. So it occurred in Watergate, Franklin, Epstein. It's going to keep going, and we as Americans have to put a stop to it.
Okay, we got another caller here, and we're going to wrap this up shortly. Thank you again for your time. Hello, thanks for calling Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, it's Martin.
A 1 second, please, while I patch you through.
Sure.
And you are on with Nick. Go ahead.
Hey, this is really interesting and important. I only started watching maybe half an hour, so I'm not sure if you touched on this on Oprah's Guru. That guy, something in Spanish there. I think it's of God, man, John of God or something like that. And so apparently he's been arrested recently, and he basically had these young women bearing children repeatedly, and those were the children that they were trafficking. That's something that I imagined was possible, but to read it, what do you guys know of this, or what do you know? Is it Nick? I think.
Yeah, Nick.
What do you know of this man?
There has been some. Are you talking about what is coming out of Utah?
No, this guy was in South America somewhere.
He was
Oprah
Oprah's
Winfrey's guru.
Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah, he was on Oprah. Oh yeah, they would this. I remember when this guy was on. He was her spiritual guru, but turns out he's doing human trafficking as well, and he's been caught.
John of God, someone says in the chat. John of God.
Yeah, John of God. Yeah.
It's I can give you my experience. When I was a teenager, I went and lived with a genuine Indian guru on an ashram. I was captivated by the Dharma bombs, and I got into Eastern philosophy. And I went and lived with this guru. It was in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, up on a mountain. And I was talking to the guru, and I could have. And the guru was supposed to be an enlightened being. He was a Swami, which means celibate. And I was talking to the guru one day, and I could have sworn I smelled cigarettes on his breath. And so I went to one of the people on the ashram, who I'd eventually called the pod people. I went to one of the pods, and I said, I could have swore I smelled cigarettes on the Swami's breath. And he goes, yeah, well, see, here's the thing with that. He has to have one vice that keeps him tethered to this plane of reality so he can teach us. Now, that did not make a lot of sense to me, but I was learning how to meditate, and I was learning yoga. It was actually a great learning experience. But then I found out he was having sex with a lot of the girls on the ashram. And then I found out he was embezzling money from his more affluent initiates. And I thought to myself, wow, this guy has to be really spiritually developed just to do all that stuff to keep on this plane of reality so he can teach us. So I am skeptical of gurus. You show me a guru and chances are I'll show you.
Yeah, generally
and sexual malfeasance.
Yeah, generally they all, it seems like every, the Nexium, all that stuff, they all always organize in the same way, where there's one guy at the top and then they end up sleeping with all the women, or most of them. Yeah, for the most part. All right, so we're gonna wrap this up, Nick. So where can people find you? What's the best way to support you?
So you can go to my website, nickbryantnyc.com, or I'd love for your listeners and viewers to check out EpsteinJustice.com. EpsteinJustice.com.
Okay, and they can sign up to be volunteers if they want.
Yeah, you can leave a message, leave an email for us in the information, and we'll be happy to get back to you. And we need young people.
Yeah,
to do this. It's going to be, if this happens, and I hope it will, it's going to be young people that are going to have to leave the church.
Okay, let's take one last call and then we'll let you go. 1 second, please. Hello. Thanks for calling Low Value Mail. You are the last caller of the night. Who am I speaking with?
Hi, my name is Brad.
Hey, Brad, 1 second, please, while we patch you through. And you're on with Nick. Go ahead, Brad. Last caller of the evening.
All right. Well, I have an interesting question. It's about birth certificates and this child trafficking. How many people or these children don't have birth certificates such that they're not even a part of the system? How do you even know that they're even being trafficked if you don't know that they're registered and you don't know they're citizens? They don't have rights as legal entities if they don't have birth certificates. So it's kind of hard to go after them and find them if they're not registered citizens, right? So what is the percentage of these kids that have birth certificates and don't have birth certificates?
I couldn't give you a percentage, but there's a huge underground network of child trafficking, huge. And the Centers on Disease Control, the Centers for Disease Control, says that 25% of girls are molested as underage girls, and 7 to 8% of boys are molested. Now, I think that it grossly underestimates the number of boys that are molested, but that translates into over 50 million people.
Wow.
And those are conservative numbers from the Center for Disease Control. So there's a huge, huge underground market for trafficking children.
Okay, so I guess that's one of the things that brings a lot of concern for me is that these people could be having baby factories manufacturing children for their own purposes, and then not registering on purpose, not registering these kids to keep them out of the system and keep them in the deep underground, what have you, in the dark. So, I mean, it's just very concerning to me.
Is there any evidence of something like that happening, though? Or is that just kind of more of a theory?
A number of people have come forward and said stuff like that. Now, this is kind of interesting. I was interviewing Juliette Bryant, who was an Epstein victim. And she was, and Epstein's New Mexico place is kind of weird. Two New Mexico governors have been named as perpetrators, Bruce King and Bill Richardson. Actually, Bill Richardson was, in addition to being the governor of New Mexico, he was Bill Clinton's energy czar. So both those guys have been named. And Epstein didn't even have to register as a sex offender in New Mexico. But anyway, Juliette Bryant was at his place in New Mexico, and she came to, and she said that she was on a table and that there was a woman doctor, and she was harvesting her eggs. So that has a lot of implications. But in 1998, Dolly the sheep was cloned. And I used to write for a science news service, and Dolly the sheep was cloned. And I was thinking to myself, if a sheep can be cloned, definitely humans can be cloned. It's not that difficult. And actually, people can be cloned for around $1.5 million. There are people getting their French bulldogs cloned for $60,000.
Like, essentially, it's not financially practical, but if you have unlimited money,
$1.5 million to one of these guys is nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
Well, the way the banking system works is they can basically loan money into existence that didn't exist before they made the loan. So they can just create any amount of money. And when they set basically the reserve requirement to effectively zero over the course of COVID, oh my God, it means they can quite literally loan into existence an infinite amount of money based upon almost nothing. I mean, you can take $1 and loan in basically an infinite amount of money from that dollar by rehypothecation and whatnot. I mean, the money is really no issue for these people at the higher level.
I think the fact that J.P. Morgan settled with Epstein victims for $290 million.
Did they admit any wrongdoing, or like how did they kind of like wipe their hands of that? Like, what did they say they did for $290 million?
The definitive settlement is still being hammered out, but I'm pretty sure that they'll give $290 million in exchange for pleading innocent to any malfeasance.
So
they're paying not $290 million.
They're paying $290 million, just saying we didn't do anything wrong, but maybe mistakes were made. Like, is that essentially what they're saying? They're just like, some mistakes were made. We're sorry we allowed him to bank with us and perpetrate all his crimes, but we didn't know.
Yeah, get out of J.P. Morgan. And one of the things that I have discovered about how banking works is that they can take a receipt and put it back into the system as if it were the money that it represents, I guess you could call it. And so, I mean, theoretically, this is what I've kind of been looking at and what could actually be taking place. I can't prove it, but this is definitely something to be for people to consider.
All right. Yeah.
And that is that they take the receipt, okay, and then they use that to rehypothecate and loan more money into the existence, and then use that money they loan into existence to pay the receipt that they used to loan the money.
Basically like a giant
so
circular. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? So they're using the receipt to pay the victims from the receipt, that, and it's all backwards and screwy. You know?
Gotcha. All right, thanks, caller.
Anyway.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, that's been the show. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Nick, for taking the time out and talking to everybody. And yeah, it's a lot to really think about. Everybody go check out both of his websites, Nick Bryant NYC and Epstein Justice.
And also, I have a podcast, the Nick Bryant podcast, comes out every Friday.
Okay, what do you talk about on the podcast?
A lot of different stuff. But we do get into child trafficking quite a bit.
Okay.
And dissociative identity disorder. The things that kids that get trafficked, ultimately, most of them end up with dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder.
Really? Okay. That's man, it's awful stuff. But you were truly doing the Lord's work, Nick. Thank you very much again for coming on. Everybody, thank you for checking out the show. That has been your show. Tomorrow night, new episode of The Bathhouse. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/lowvaluemail. I've been Danny Polshuk. Have a good night.
My shit heroic. Empathic abilities, yeah, my face be also stoic. Bleep, blow up, nigga, that just means I'm working. They see me as a leader, so that's why I'm Captain Kirkin. These tracks from the stars, that much is for certain. You can feel this hit if you up or if you hurt. I'm raising my stock, not talking my feet in some Birkin. Number Johnny 5, got a fucking short circuit. Bring the track to life when I spit phenomenal. When I hit, she feel that shit in her abdominals. These rappers make me laugh like comic view, they comical. You know I got a ball out, I hit the track running just like Sonic do. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, they was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, and they tried to down me on some KO type shit. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, now we pulling up fresh on some flight shit. Ha. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, they was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, then they tried to down me on some KO type shit. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah.